Good morning and welcome to the DTN Ag Summit Series. I'm your host, DTN's Farm Business Editor, Katie Dehlinger. I'm excited to welcome you here today. We're having a great conversation about how to craft a game plan for tough weather and tough prices. We know it's not always the easiest situation, especially when you're looking at corn and soybean prices that are so far below where they were last year. And when you adjust for inflation, they are even tighter. So today what we're going to talk about is we're going to keep it tight and focused. We're going to have a presentation from DTN Ag Meteorologist John Baranick talking about the weather outlook. I know we've come through this super El Nino phase. It was strong and big, and it looks like the weather pattern might change. John is going to explain a little bit about what that means and how that could impact different regions of the country. It could be a tough year weather-wise for some folks. And then DTN lead analyst Todd Hultman will join me on set. We're going to talk about the grain markets. He'll give his outlook and really put into perspective what it all means and maybe talk about a few things farmers can do to take advantage or to try and make the best out of this situation. We're hoping to have everything wrapped up by about 10:15 this morning so you all can get on with your day. We know you're busy and we appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning. So with that, I would like to welcome to set DTN Ag Meteorologist John Baranick. John, welcome.
All right, thanks for having me. I know it's not you putting us on, it's DTN, but thanks. I always like sitting next to you. It's fun.
It's always fun to hang out with you. I think we have more fun joking off camera on different things. Today, I curled my hair and I got mad at him because he made it rain. And
sure did.
It was a morning.
Yeah, it's raining here in Omaha, and it's raining across a lot of the country right now, and we're going to need that because we're coming off of a season that was pretty dry for a long stretch of the year. And so we've had some luck here recently with El Nino. Not everywhere, of course, but across large portions of the country. Hopefully we can see that continue.
Yeah. I mean, I've learned not to be upset about rain. My curls might not be as pretty, but rainfall is a good thing.
Rain makes corn. I won't finish the rest of the song. But yeah, so when we go to the seasonal forecast here, it just seemed appropriate to put up Jim Mora. And if everybody doesn't know, his famous news conference where someone asked him a question about going to the playoffs, and he's like, "Playoffs? You kidding me? Playoffs?" Well, we're going back to La Nina, it looks like, again. So La Nina again? You kidding me? All right, anyway, my little joke to start off. But if we look back to what El Nino meant for the winter season, it was incredibly warm, especially across the northern tier of the country. If you add every day up between December 1st and February 29th, which is leap year this year, it was the warmest winter the U.S. has seen on record, and areas across the north really kind of led that charge. But we also saw a pretty active weather pattern as well, especially across the south. You can see how places from California and even New Mexico, all the way through the Gulf Coast and up the East Coast, were very active, very typical of La Nina or El Nino. We did have some dry patches out there though, so we didn't have quite as much precipitation in the Ohio Valley as we'd like to see. That's also pretty typical. It wasn't as bad as it could have been though, so we're actually in pretty decent shape in the eastern half of the Corn Belt. And there might be a little bullseye there around Iowa and Nebraska, but that was kind of more regionally instead of how actually widespread it looks on there. It wasn't all that wet across here. We're still dealing with some drought. And this, again, like I said, this is just the basic, what happens during El Nino. We see the split in the jet stream. It gets very warm across the northern tier of the country and a wet and active period across the south. And that's what we saw. It was El Nino was so strong this year. It just followed it followed the prototypical textbook classification. Didn't always affect us, and we weren't always in this. We did have a couple of stretches there where in mid-January we got a visit from the polar vortex, and every so often we get a little burst of colder air, but it only lasted a day or two for the most part, and we kept active, so it's been pretty nice. If we look at the drought monitor then and where we were at the beginning of the winter and where we were last week, it updated this morning, but I didn't have time to send it over to Nick here this morning. But it's pretty similar there. The one on the right, just the amount of drought that has been reduced across the southern tier of the country has been incredible. Some of those areas in Louisiana and Mississippi that were dealing with the D4 exceptional drought, is now completely eliminated. So we've come a long way in a lot of areas, but we still have trouble spots, and this is still lingering from our 3 straight seasons of La Nina. Drought has been a big part of that, and the biggest area of concern right now is right around Iowa. You can see that red blob there in northeast Iowa that's been dealing with drought the last few years. It just seems to be in a spot that just can't get the rain. All the systems go around them. But we've seen kind of drought just kind of maintained across the central Corn Belt for quite a while now. So it's still an issue going forward. And when we look at, just kind of, again, how much reduction in drought we've seen this in the South, and all that green just pops out like a sore thumb. But it's even parts of Missouri, Kansas, even in the Four Corners area, where we've seen an active pattern at least reduce, some of those impacts. We've got pretty decent soil moisture in that. I'll take a look at that in a second. But we also saw drought being increased there over the northern plains. It's not as bad as it could be at this point of the year, but we don't have a whole lot of snowpack around either to help feed some of the soil moisture. So when we do look at soil moisture, and here's one way of doing it, this is the top 80 inches of soil, and anything in the redder shades there is below normal soil moisture. Anything in blue is above normal. Doesn't mean it's good soil moisture, it just means it's above normal for this time of year. You can see those areas in the plains have certainly benefited quite a bit. Again, it's not a lot of soil moisture, but it's better than where we usually are. And then down in the southeast as well. But if you check out that spot there in northeast Iowa where the drought is, soil moisture is still a problem, and really across large portions of the country it is too. Here's another way of looking at soil moisture, and this is the root zone soil moisture from NASA. This is just the top meter, or 40 inches of soil moisture, not the full 80. And it's drier in the top portion of the soil than further down, especially again around Iowa, northern Missouri. This is a couple days old, so we have the system going through now that's going to help out with this. But it just goes to show we are not in a great spot right now in terms of soil moisture. So the rains that are going to come are going to be very important. All this, again, is being driven by El Nino. It is the biggest driving climate factor for North America, not just North America, but really globally. And right now, we're just an update on it. This past Monday, we've seen that 3.4 region, which is where we kind of classify either El Nino, La Nina, is sitting at 1.4 degrees Celsius above normal. When you get above 0.5, that's an El Nino, so it's still a pretty strong El Nino, but we have seen that kind of come down recently. You can see on those graphs on the right how some of those have kind of dipped from their peak back in November and December. And what we're looking at here is kind of important. It's our weekly sea surface temperature anomaly. I'm going to point out one section in here just east of that box along the equator. You notice some blues there. And if we looked a couple weeks ago, it was all of those orange colors. And what we've seen is we've seen a blob of cold water reach the surface, and we're going to start to degrade El Nino here pretty quickly. If you look underneath the surface, you can see where that's coming from. At the top of this graph here is the surface, and then you're looking down with depth. Those areas on the left are over by Australia, and the ones on the right are over by South America. And you can see that blob of cold water there just below the surface. It's coming up, and even though we have some warm temperatures right there at the surface, right around the middle of the Pacific, those colder temperatures there in the east are going to be spreading, and probably pretty quickly here over the next couple of months. So with that, when we take a look at some of the forecasts for what ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation, is going to do, we hit that kind of super El Nino spot here in the fall where we hit 2 degrees above Celsius, but we're going to see this rapid decline in sea surface temperatures across the tropical Pacific here over the next couple of months. This is our American climate model. It's actually done the best out of all of them at getting the kind of pattern correct well in advance. We've seen this model do it for several months now, hinting at getting us back into La Nina. And I'll mention here later in a little bit about historically that's typically the case anyway. But you can see how strong it's projecting La Nina to be here come this summer. We stay in a very short time period during the spring where we're in these neutral conditions where it won't be controlling weather, and we'll be going into our summer in a likely La Nina here where it will be controlling our weather patterns. Of course, the Americans aren't the only ones that have a climate model. Other ones around the globe also do it. These are a little bit more muted than our American model, and our American model might be just a little bit too aggressive with how cold it might get in the Pacific. But you can see the same kind of trend. We go through neutral conditions here in the spring, and then in the summer, we're headed into La Nina. Most of the models do that. If you can see the kind of bolded, almost crimson or purple color there, that's the average of all those models, and definitely has us in a significant La Nina here this summer. So we're pretty confident about where we're headed. Now, if we look at where we've been, and this is, you take all those numbers. I mentioned we're at 1.4 right now. You can see back in January we're at 1.8. But what we've gone through over the last 4 winters has been absolutely incredible. 3 straight years of La Nina. They were just moderates. They weren't super strong, but they were persistent through those 3 years. We flipped that real quick into a super El Nino. Now we're headed into another La Nina. It's at least here 5 years of some crazy ocean temperatures. And what we notice actually when we look at history, and this is a little bit of a kind of congested slide here, but what we're looking at is all these other years we've seen hit that 2 degrees Celsius mark, that super El Nino mark. What's happened afterwards? And what we see is outside of the one in the 1960s at the top, it's followed by every strong El Nino is followed by a La Nina, either the summer or fall of the next year. So this is something that is definitely on the historical records as being pretty accurate. And it looks like we're headed to that again. What also you should notice here, it's not just 1 La Nina, but it's 2 in 4 out of these 5 years. So we're not in a happy position, I think, for a lot of us. I know La Nina has caused a lot of troubles over the last few years. We built up all kinds of drought, and El Nino wasn't able to do it during the summer last year, and so we're unfortunately headed back to some troubles. But it's not the only thing that affects weather, right? Every La Nina, every El Nino is different because all these things that I have listed here also impact our weather. And so when we go through this neutral transition where we don't have anything really controlling our weather, it's these sorts of things that are on the list, and I won't go through them all. It's just there to let you know that we talk a lot about El Nino and La Nina, but there's other things that matter too. And so we'll be watching those, especially when we're in those neutral conditions about what's going on. And since we don't really have ENSO or El Nino controlling our weather here this spring, it could be kind of wild. So we'll be on our look at that. But when we look at, historically, when we're going through a transition from El Nino to La Nina, what do we normally see? We can average all these out. We call these our analogs. And what we typically see here, what you're seeing on the left is temperature departure from normal, and it's precipitation on the right. All these ones added up kind of give us a pattern here that we stick around with El Nino conditions likely into April, even if we're going into that neutral category before then. There's a little bit of a hangover effect in the atmosphere that keeps us in those El Nino conditions for a while. So you notice how it's much warmer across the northern tier of the country and quite active across the south. Even the plains get pretty active in most Marches, and we've already started to see that here this month. The second half of the month looks pretty active as well. But as we get into April and May, that's when we start to see some pockets of dryness show up. So we're going to be a little bit concerned about these, and it's unfortunately right in the middle of the country too, so it's not where we want it to be. So when we go to the forecast, then we take history into account, we take models into account. They're a little bit different than what our analogs are saying. So when we blend that all together, here's our spring forecast. It does include the first 2 weeks of March, so what we've already gone through, plus the forecast, the daily forecast here for the next week. before we start adding in all of the analogs and other climate models to it. So it's kind of heavily focused on what happened in March. And the first half of March has been super warm. We were breaking records up in the upper Midwest with temperatures, and it has been pretty active. It looks like it will continue, like I said, to be pretty active here through the rest of the month, and we'll see how April goes. But when we break that down month by month, again, March was pretty warm. When we get to April, we've got another risk of some cold air moving through. We will have some bursts of colder air moving through the rest of March. It just won't be able to overcome all the warmth we've had through the first 2 weeks. But when we get into April, our long-range forecasters are talking about another period that looks like it could bring down some Arctic air. We're looking at kind of the mid-April timeframe for that, but it might be warm ahead of that, and it'll probably be warm after that goes away. So honestly, this burst that moves through might be kind of intense. That's why we're showing a lot of blues on the map there across the middle of the country. But if it's not as cold as what we're projecting, this map here for April could look a little bit warmer. And then by the time we get into May, we've got a pretty warm look across most of the country. We should be good. In terms of precipitation, again, March does look to stay active. We've had a pretty good system last week. We're in a good system here this week. We've got a couple more towards the end of the month that look pretty good as well. Especially when we're looking at the Central Plains and possibly the Northern Plains too. We'll see about that. But even areas in the upper Midwest don't look overly bad here. We've got a lot of drought and we need a lot of rain. We're not going to get a lot of rain, it doesn't look like, but we'll get some. But when we get into April and May is when we at least have some better chances of that active pattern continuing. It might not look like it in that April forecast where we got some pretty dry conditions over the Northern Plains and the upper Midwest. But if you can kind of draw a line there from the Central Plains down into the Gulf Coast and up the East Coast, it still shows that we have systems moving through. So hopefully we can continue to build soil moisture there. And then once we get into May and we get into the thunderstorm season, we actually have a pretty wet forecast for a lot of us. So if we can get our seeds in the ground kind of early, and soil temperatures have been very warm. We've already hit that magical 50-degree mark in a lot of places in Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, all the way through Ohio already. Usually that's farther south, down south of the Tennessee Valley. So, conditions are getting pretty good right now for that. We might have to worry about some of these frost things later this month and then in mid-April, so that might delay you a little bit. And I would kind of suggest kind of holding off a little bit, even if the planting conditions do look pretty good right now. But once we get to May, we come into a pretty active storm track through the country, and outside of Texas and the southwestern plains where we might have some issues with wheat, corn and soybean early growth does look okay. Now again, our soil moisture is not huge, right? So if this doesn't turn out to be super widespread, we might have some issues with that as well. But then once we get into summer, then we might. So we talk about La Nina developing during summer. What does that mean for us in the U.S.? Historically and technically, if you go by the government standards, and I have a smile on my face, you can't see that. So, but La Niñas, El Niños typically don't have a huge influence on weather during the Northern Hemisphere's summer. Most of those impacts are down towards the south. However, when we look at history, during the summertime, we show kind of a different picture here, and this is where the concern really is for this summer. If you look at those temperatures there on the left, June, July, August, we have a hot dome of high pressure across the central and eastern portions of the country. It does not look like anything resembling variable conditions that was shown on that last slide there for North America. And so this is where the main concern is going to be. We're going to get a semi kind of permanent dome of high pressure, and we saw that happening the last time we went from El Nino to La Nina back in 2020. Everybody who lives out in the plains or the Canadian prairies probably remembers that June quite well, as we just had a persistent heat ridge the entire month and just blasted us with heat and dryness. So we will be concerned with that. But if we look at some other El Ninos transitioning to La Ninas during the same time period, June actually ends up to be a wet month across the north and into Canada. So we'll see if that kind of plays out or if it plays out more like 2020. But when we look at July's and August, it's surprisingly wet. So even though we have this dome of high pressure, if you notice, a lot of that is over the northern plains and into the Great Lakes, which means a lot of these systems can slide on down underneath it. And so pulling up some Gulf moisture, getting a little disturbance through, and you get some pretty good thunderstorms. And we see that in, at least in history, during July and August. Of course, those are the most important months for corn and then soybeans. So we're going to be hoping that that stays the case. But when we go to the forecast then, models are super hot across the entire country. So when we blend our analog years with that, we get a very hot forecast. We're going to see heat stress. Our main concern then is, are we going to get enough precipitation? And if you look on the image on the right, we have better chances. That doesn't mean everybody will, but better chances across the eastern half of the Corn Belt. Western half of the Corn Belt through the plains, not so much. And we take this month by month. It's not even why look at temperatures right now, because it's all hot all summer long. I don't think it's going to be hot every day during the summer where we're going to be talking about record heat every single day. But this does indicate that we're going to have long stretches of heat that are going to be important during the growing season and during pollination. But when we get to precipitation, then this is where we kind of blend both of those together. You'll probably notice a lot of history in here where we have a pretty wet northern tier of the country during June, and kind of central eastern Corn Belt later in July and August are much wetter, with kind of a western Corn Belt dry period. Honestly, models are not too excited about precipitation during the summer. They have very little of it once we get past June. So a lot of dryness got bled into our forecast here, and there is concern, with a ridge of high pressure that could be semi-permanent across North America here. That would be the concern. That would be the risk. The only thing that would potentially skew this is that La Niñas are also very famous for increasing tropical disturbances and setting off the hurricane season kind of early. So that does play into why some of these southern areas might be a little bit wetter. But overall, not terrible looking across the eastern half of the Corn Belt. It does mean that it's probably going to be fragmented, though. So even if we do have a better look over the eastern portions of the Corn Belt, it doesn't mean we're not going to get some areas or stripes in there, some regions, blotches that don't end up with some good rainfall. It's just how thunderstorms work. We all know how that works when we don't get the rain, but our neighbor did, and we get mad at them for it. But it's really the western Corn Belt, the plains, that we're the most concerned about that. Not only for corn and soybeans, but also for wheat. We've seen kind of soil moisture down there really take a dive over the last few months. And we don't have a whole lot of hope through the spring or summer for that. So that'll probably be a concern again this year as well. So lots of good news. I know for Kent, I got to make sure to talk about Canada for Kent. Where we're at in Canada. I mean, and everything that happens in Canada affects us here too in the U.S. So don't fall asleep on Canada. But they've got widespread drought over almost the entire prairies section of their country. So they're already starting off in a bad spot. I don't have the soil moisture for us, but it's not really all that good. And they don't have a huge snowpack up there either. El Nino was pretty warm for a lot of them, and the snow that has happened has pretty much melted. As we get through the spring season forecast, we're kind of on the warm side and variable. We don't see a huge signal either way, wet or dry. It could go either way. What I'll say is over the course of March, we were going to have some colder air move in here for the rest of the month. It looks like it'll probably be Arctic in nature once we get into April as well. So we have that pocket of colder air sticking around through April. Then once we hit May, we turn the heat on a bit, and we might see that ridge pop up a little bit early for us in Canada. As far as precipitation, not a whole lot of signal one way or the other. It's kind of evened all out in March, a little drier in April, a little wetter in May, but overall not a huge signal one way or the other. So we don't have a whole lot of soil moisture out there now. Doesn't look like we're going to get a whole lot of help. We're hoping that we just have just enough to get out there planting early growth and then get into the summer season. But again, just like the U.S., it's going to be warm. It's going to be that ridge, again, having a big influence. Luckily for Canada, I don't know if it's luckily or not, but it's going to be where that northern edge of the ridge sets up. If it sets up over the U.S., thunderstorms actually develop out in Alberta on the Rockies and then move across the prairies pretty significantly. If it bumps up a little bit further north into the prairies, that happens farther north. So we'll see how that all plays out. I remember 2020 was not a very good year for those in Canada, the last time we went through this kind of transition, so we'll be watching that pretty closely. We can go through the month by month, but it's, again, a lot like the U.S., where we don't have a whole lot of anything other than heat. And then when we get to the precipitation, it's pretty variable. It's just really where that ridge is going to set up. Are we going to get it bursting all the way up into the northern sections of Canada, or are we going to get it kind of right along the U.S. border there and get some thunderstorms to move across? So TBD on that. And we just, history and models kind of suggest a mix of both. So we'll just have to see how this year goes. South America, have to talk about South America as well. They're in the midst of their safrinha corn season. They're in Brazil now. They harvested their soybeans. It's pretty much done. Their safrinha corn has been almost all planted now. And they are not sitting in a good spot there in Brazil. Argentina has been much better, and their growing season is much longer. They're in their fill period for their corn and soybeans. You can see the precipitation there over the last, while they have had some dry stretches here and there, overall sitting in really good shape. But I mean, even though they've had pretty limited rainfall in Brazil, it's still a lot of rain, and we got to keep that in mind. So the soil moisture there might be well below normal, but it's actually pretty decent for the early growth period for their safrinha corn. And I missed, oh no. There we go. So there's the soil moisture map. So you can see there's a lot of green there in Brazil. The middle of the country there is where we're looking at for the safrinha corn section. And it's still decent soil moisture right now. It's just way below normal. You can see Argentina's in a good spot as well. So when we look at that, fall season, our spring is their fall. When we head through that, you can see just that area of dry conditions across central Brazil there for their safrinha corn crop. So while the soil moisture is good right now, good enough, we're not building that soil moisture in. We're going to have a lot of dry periods coming up, and their wet season might end a little bit early. And what they really want to do is get through their pollination period of their corn with the rainfall, so when it shuts off, they still have all that subsoil moisture to rely upon. Well, they don't have a whole lot of subsoil moisture right now, and the forecast for the next 3 months isn't very good for them either. So we're going to see some potential for a crop that looks really pretty decent right now and might be good all the way through the end of March and into early April in a good spot, start to take a turn towards the end of April and into May when they're going through that pollination period. So that's going to be the biggest concern for them. And really, there's all sorts of things that La Nina does over the summer season. I mean, we can talk about Australia. We can talk about what happens with the monsoon in India and Southeast Asia. But really, La Nina affects everybody around the globe. So we'll be watching this pretty carefully, and it'll be on our minds. And really, what I write about for the next 6 to 8 months is all about what's happening with La Nina. How's that going to happen? So hopefully we've got some decent conditions. I know it's not great news for us, but what La Nina does as well is it also hurts the next season's corn and soybean crops down in South America. We saw that the 3 previous seasons, so at least to some degree. And so we have some hope there that even if we struggle a little bit, other areas of the globe are going to struggle as well. So with that, that's my part of the presentation, Katie. I think we'll take questions after Todd's done. So hang on to those, write them down, and we'll get to them. And hopefully, Katie, Todd's got better news than I do.
Well,
Cross my
we'll have to
fingers.
see about that. I know La Nina is not really good news in general for the market that's been having some struggles. But like John said, we'll do question and answer together at the end. So please drop those in the Q&A spot on your Zoom account there, and we'll make sure we get to those when we have lots of time reserved for that. So we'll have a really good conversation. It's one of our favorite things about working in this format is getting to all talk together. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to get John off the set, get Todd on, and then move on forward with our markets presentation. So we'll be right back. Welcome back to the DTN Ag Summit Series. We just had John Baranick on to talk a little bit about the weather forecast and what that's going to look like for the spring season and beyond. And now we're going to pivot and we're going to look at the grain markets. We've got lead analyst Todd Hultman with me. Welcome, Todd.
Thanks, Katie.
Great to have you back on set.
Appreciate it. I enjoy these. It's nice to be able to update with our customers and anyone else that's interested.
I know you've spent a lot of time this winter going to different farm shows across the country and talking to farmers. What's been sort of the feel when you're out there visiting with folks?
Well, obviously it's tough. For producers, these are the toughest prices, most painful prices we've seen since 2020. And we're back to a surplus market again. That's never any fun to get through. But we do have a little history of how markets behave when they get in these heavy surplus markets. And we'll talk about that today to see what kind of opportunities we can find.
Well, with that, I'll let you take it away. I think that's what most people are really interested in hearing this morning.
All right, fair enough. Thanks, Katie. Good morning, everybody. We're dancing with the bear once again. We haven't done this for about 4 years. We've had a pretty good stretch of prices here, but obviously that came to an end last year with the record U.S. harvest, and now we're following up with some big South American crops, it looks like. So we have a much different scenario in front of us, much bigger challenges in terms of getting a good price, getting paid for your efforts for the season. So that's going to be a real challenge here in 2023. I'll try to give you my best advice, but let's just be honest up front. It's not going to be easy. It's a tough situation. Since we met last December, there's been some significant changes in the market. Brazil had a lot of weather challenges earlier in their season. They had hot and dry stretches in central Brazil. They had flooding in the south. Things were looking tough, but then they got some rain around Thanksgiving time, and then they got even better rains that followed that New Year's weekend, and that's when the prices really responded in South America. We saw sharp drops in Brazil's corn and soybean prices, and that just added to the pressure on our own prices here in the U.S. Overall, the weather in Argentina has been favorable, unlike last year's droughts, so they remain on track for pretty good crops, it's looking like, and that's adding to the bearish pressure on our U.S. prices. We did also see a sharp drop in China's soybean prices in the month of January, which adds to our concerns about what's China's demand appetite going to be like this year. But we've seen a recent rebound. We'll talk about that in just a bit. And then lastly, of course, we've had wildfires pop up in the Western Plains. So just another reminder of the dry conditions John was talking about. It's interesting when you look at the drought monitor, the soil moisture or the drought level readings look much improved, and the winter wheat crop ratings we're getting out of the southwestern plains are much better than a year ago. But the wildfires remind us that hazardous conditions are just not that far off. We're still in a very touchy situation there. There we go. One of the other outside market concerns we have that continues to haunt the market is this whole interest rate scenario. And earlier, it was looking like we were on a good path for lower rates. But just recently, the price of crude oil has popped up again. And so I owe that, I think, to tensions in the Middle East. We're seeing more active aggression from Iran through their surrogates. There's the threats in the Red Sea right now. And just recently, OPEC and Russia, so this OPEC plus group, continues to put pressure on the market, cutting their production levels. Russia announced that they were going to pull back almost another 500,000 barrels a day here in the second quarter of the year. Excuse me. Oh, pardon me one second. OPEC is going to continue their production cuts through the second quarter. Since 2022, the OPEC Plus group has pulled about almost 6 million barrels a day of oil production out of the market. Now, here in the U.S., we're doing our job. We're producing the most amount of oil on record for the U.S. We're back above 13 million barrels a day, and that's helping us, and that really helped bring down inflation earlier, but we really need to get past this I would say, outside market threat coming from OPEC and others. So in my mind, crude oil still has a lot to do with inflation, and that still has a lot to do with the interest rates we're going to be talking about in the year ahead. So right now, things are a little bit touchy. Love to see that oil price come down a little more and some of those tensions ease, but that's something we're going to have to track closely. All right, let's take a look at corn. And before I get into the recommendations or the best opportunities I can find for us, I just want to review, for anyone that might not have been here in December, the situation or what I see as the price situation here for corn. So here we have the monthly chart, goes back, I think, to 2015. The red rectangular box points us back to the 2015 to 2020 period, and that's the last time we had a surplus like we do now. So all through that 15 to 20 period, we had roughly 2 billion bushels surplus in corn, give or take a couple 100 million bushels. Our ending stocks to use ratio was similar to what we have today. USDA is estimating just under 15% today. The only difference between prices now and prices then is that, as you know, our input costs are roughly 32% higher going by USDA's estimates. So as we compare our price situation now to what it was then, we need to factor in that 32% jump. So that red rectangle is where prices were throughout those previous periods if they were going by today's prices. So the old $3 level of support is now $4. In December, I was expecting a range of 23 to 24 prices of roughly 4.25 on the low end to 5.5 on the upper end. Now I've dropped that range 25 cents on both ends, largely because of the beneficial weather that we've had in South America since then and the concern about the China situation on demand. The other thing that came out, USDA's Ag Outlook Forum in February came out with their new crop estimate. And so even though we have a 15% ending stocks to use ratio now, USDA is making an early guess that that's going to jump to a 17% ending stocks to use ratio. So that also adds to the bearish pressure we're seeing on prices. But I think it might help our producers out there to know that today's $4 mark roughly is the old $3 mark. So that's just how depressed and painful the current situation is. But that's also where I would expect long-term support to be in the market. And so far, it has behaved like that's going to play out correctly. Of course, we still have some uncertainty ahead. As John mentioned, we don't know when that dry season is going to show up in Brazil for sure. So that safrinha crop is still at risk. That's certainly not guaranteed by any stretch of the imagination. And of course, our own U.S. crop, we're going to have a lot to learn. And as you heard from John, there could be some significant challenges, especially in the Western Corn Belt this year with the hot temperatures. And we'll have to see if there's going to be enough moisture to help crops handle that. So there's still bullish risk. I want to emphasize, though, that the past several months, well, really since harvest time, the market has just been over-obsessed with the amount of supply in the market from last year's harvest, but also the amount of supply that's going to be coming from South America. That bearish winter mood, I expect, will change. And the reason I say that is, Nope, sorry. We'll get to that. All right. Sorry, a couple more things. Corn. The other nice thing helping support corn, I believe at this at least low $4 area, is that we're seeing very good demand for the cheap corn, and that's good news. in that sense, and should eventually put some support here into the market. Here, the blue line is Iowa's corn processing value. That's a report that comes out every week from USDA on Mondays, and it's basically answering the question, if we take a bushel of corn to the ethanol plant, how much value do you get from processing that corn into ethanol, distiller grain, and corn oil? The most recent answer, $5.61 a bushel. Well, that's comfortably above the current price in the low $4 range, $4.11 there on our DTN National Corn Index. But as you can see, if we compared that to say what the situation was last fall, we were looking at a good $3 margin there between those two prices. Now it's down to roughly $1.50 a bushel. So that margin's narrowing, and so we might have some concerns moving forward about the level of ethanol production or the enticement to keep the plants buying and taking in the corn as much. But so far, it's been a nice source of demand, and our ethanol production's up 4.5% from a year ago at this time. So that's good news. The corn export sales market is actually doing much better than it was a year ago. We're not quite up to the 4-year average, but as you can see, now this report is from a week ago. I realize we just had an update this morning, but we didn't have time to get it on for today's broadcast. But the most recent update, corn export shipments, not the sales, but the shipments, are up 33% from a year ago. So the red line is where we're at today. The green shaded area is last year's pace. We're doing much better. And of course, it's easier to make exports and move corn through the export process when you're dealing with $4 corn instead of $6 or $6.50 corn. So that makes sense, and we're seeing a good response to demand there. We have been a little bit cheaper than Brazil up until recently. Now our prices are comparable, and of course a lot's going to depend on just how well what Brazil does with their crop and their eventual harvest in July. If they come up short, we should have more good export opportunities through the summer. I hate to click it twice. There we go. Some of the key prices we watch for corn. The upper chart is the July corn price from the Dalian Exchange in China. As you can see, this fall, they fell to new lows. I think that confirmed the reports we were hearing that China had a record crop. I have no doubts that's true, but I also mentioned that even though they were showing this record crop, that their corn prices were still quite high, and it suggested to me that they were going to have to make purchases ahead. It was just a matter of who they were going to buy the corn from, Brazil or Ukraine or us, and it's been a bit of a combination, but we've gotten in on just a little bit of that. Now in the last month and a half, you've seen a nice bounce back in the price of corn in China, and they're now at the equivalent of $8.69 a bushel. So that tells me that even though they had a record harvest, or they probably had a very good harvest, who knows exactly what the number was, their demand is very quickly compensating for that harvest, and they need corn once again. So that's good news overall for the market. Even if they did buy it from Brazil, it helps tighten things for the U.S. The lower chart is the price of corn in Brazil on the Bovespa exchange. You can see in October, November, they had those weather concerns that brought the corn price up. Once we hit early January, when the rains showed up again for central Brazil especially, the corn price took a tough shot and sunk quickly lower in the months of January and February, largely related to rain, but also related to some slow demand for their corn at that time. Just in the past couple weeks, since we've turned the corner in March, we're starting to see a little bit of lift in the corn price in Brazil now, and to me that's encouraging because I think there is good reason, as John mentioned, to be concerned about the soil moisture level for this safrinha crop ahead and just how much help they're going to have to get through their pollination period. So as we say, there's still risk in that market. We can't nail the coffin shut yet. Okay, Now, this is where we can compare to previous years. The 2015 to 2020 period has a lot, fundamentally speaking, in common with the situation we're in today, and once we make those adjustments. Now, this particular chart is the price of December corn, so I'm focused on new crop opportunities with this chart. And if you see through that December 15 through 20 period, the basically low of that range was $3.15 a bushel. And of course, that equates to $4.15 a bushel today. Notice that even though we were in a bearish situation, we had a surplus level of corn very similar to what we have today. And I'm sure probably this time of year, things didn't look any more bullish for corn then than it did now. We still had rallies during those bearish years. And basically, you know, volatility is built into the market. It's an important part of the market, and it happens. Markets are nervous. We get nervous about a lot of things. Our attention goes from one shiny toy to another, and that's how markets behave. If we look back at this period, we can see that we had several rallies. In 2016, for instance, we had a 42% jump from that low price of the range. In 2017, we had the smallest rally, but even that was a 32% jump from the low of $3.15 a bushel. And that was followed the following year by 36%. And then, of course, you probably remember 2019, we had a horrible planting season, tough to get crops in. We had a 50% jump, unexpected. Now, I don't expect the 50% scenario this year, but if we just keep our expectations somewhat cautious or reasonable, a 32% jump in today's market would take that December corn price to roughly $5.48. A 44% jump would take it up to almost $6. I think the 32% jump is a reasonable expectation at this point in time, given the uncertainties ahead of us. So basically, that's why I have the upper end of the range near 525. I think anything, if you can get a forward sale made anywhere near 525 or above, I think you're going to be doing pretty good in this supply environment. And I'll explain a little more about that in a second here. Sorry, I'm clicking my button and there's a delay, but I don't want to jump over. Okay, now with the crop insurance situation the way it is, the February average for corn this year worked out to $4.66. I'm going to assume that everybody got revenue protection, I hope. I think the deadline's coming up here in a day or so. If you got 85% revenue protection, that's what I'm going to assume here. $3.96 is basically the floor or the protective price level if we assume that you have an average yield in 2024. So that's kind of starting out as your risk protection on crop insurance. Now, I understand if your costs are anywhere near the national costs of just over $5 a bushel, $3.96 isn't much protection. The current December price is, this is as of last night, was $4.73. Right now, with crop insurance being the way it is, there's no reason to buy a $4 put, right? You've already got that built in to your revenue protection. I do think, however, with corn having chances to show some type of rally this early summer or summer, that you're going to have a chance to buy an inexpensive put that's going to raise the floor level on your protection. Right now, the D's 440 put is trading around 20 cents. In my mind, that's too much, and you're not getting a big benefit there. The 460 put's going for 29 cents. So I'm not eager, and in strategies, we have not done anything yet on the new crop corn situation. Excuse me. For one thing, because I think we're near long-term support. For another thing, these put values I don't think are very enticing. And another thing is we have a sustainable aviation fuel announcement that hasn't been made yet. So option volatility tends to pick up in May, but keep in mind, time value dissipates all summer, and the best thing that could help the put price come down would be some type of rally in the market. So if we got up near, $5, $5.20 on the new crop price, we'd start seeing much better protection levels on the downside of the market, and we could even get a shot at making a decent forward sale if we could get around 525 or a little higher. So that's kind of my best hope for the year ahead, and that's not based on any fundamental prediction. It's just based on the normal volatility of corn even in the bearish years. Sorry, okay. Now, I think an interesting question to ask in this market is, what do we need in terms of demand to get the corn market back to a more profitable level? And the answer is roughly 400 million bushels net effect of increased demand. So you see, this is the US balance sheet from USDA. The far right column are the most recent estimates that came from March. They're estimating 2.17 billion bushels of ending stocks and roughly 14.5 billion bushels of use. So right now, the ending stocks to use ratio is just under 15%. And as I mentioned, for the new crop, USDA has an estimate of 17%. Well, the history of corn is that basically you get a break-even price with your production costs if that corn supply is roughly 12% ending stocks to use. So what would bring it down to that level? A net increase of 400 million bushels of demand. And I want to show you that that's really not a big amount, and it's not undoable. And I want to give you just a little example here of what it would take to get that. And of course, if we dropped production by 400 million bushels off the new crop estimate, that would certainly help too. But okay, the sustainable aviation fuel. The biofuels are the best hope that corn and soybeans have of countering the year after year effects of losing export share basically to Brazil in the world. I was hoping we were going to get an SAF announcement on March 1 at Commodity Classic. As you know, that didn't happen. The decision's been delayed, but I want to point out some things here. So the grand challenge that President Biden set forth in 2021, there's a goal of 3 billion gallons of sustainable aviation fuel to be consumed by the year 2030, and they want to lift that to 35 billion gallons by 2035. Well, I don't know if we're going to get to 35 gallons, but let's just stick with the 3 billion gallon goal right now. If corn can get even a small piece of that business, it makes a big difference. Roughly, it takes almost 600 million bushels of corn to make 1 billion gallons of SAF. So even if we could get just 700 million gallons of that 3 billion gallon goal by 2030, that's a significant help to the corn market and to the corn market shot at being a more profitable situation. I'll also point out Rabobank has a little closer term expectation. They expect 2.2 billion gallons of SAF production capacity by 2026. Now, I don't know if we can expect corn to get a third of that 2026 goal, but I just want to point out that it's not going to take a huge amount of corn to have quite a substantial impact on our bottom line and get us back to a more profitable market again. So all is not lost, all is not hopeless. It's going to take a while, yes, to ramp up SAF production, and we'll have to see how much of our corn or ethanol products are going to qualify for this new fuel. So that's why I'm waiting very anxiously to see what they come up with for requirements here. And it's also another reason why I hesitate to make new crop marketing decisions until we hear the details of this. So the secretary said that it should come out in a few weeks, and I hope he's right. He said weeks, not months, to quote him. So hopefully we'll get an answer on that fairly soon. Okay. Let's take a look at soybeans. We're going to see we're in a similar situation, but a little bit of differences here. So to bring us up to date, last time when we were in December, I was expecting a range in the old crop soybeans of $12 to $15. And I thought we had a very good export opportunity before Brazil's next crop arrived. Well, of course, it was shortly after our December summit that we saw Brazil receive much more beneficial rain. Their soybean crop fell in the month of January. Their soybean prices fell dramatically in the month of January. And along with the expectation that their crops were doing better from the rain, we had concerns about China's demand level as we saw prices in China for soybeans and soybean meal drop dramatically. Well, much of that has somewhat healed up, is the good news. Just to point out, excuse me, I now expect the new range for soybeans, for old crop soybeans, to be $11 to $14. And again, this I think compares fairly well to what we saw in the 2017 to 2020 period. If we factor in production costs being 31% higher at this time, the old $8 to $11 range during that bearish period now looks like 10.5 on the low end to roughly 14.40 on the high end. Keep in mind, our ending stocks to use ratio right now is estimated at 8%. Typically, a 10% ending stocks to use ratio gives us a good shot at least a break-even price opportunity with production costs. So for soybeans to trade down near $11 like it did, I just thought was really overdone. We still have a good demand situation, and even though our ending stocks have come up, they're now 315 million bushels being estimated. That is not a burdensome amount, historically speaking, on the market. I want to point out that today's $11 price translates to $8.40 a bushel before COVID. Now, basically, the only times we got to $8.40 a bushel during that pre-COVID time of more bearish supplies in soybeans was during the tariff dispute with China. And I would argue that the situation today is not near as bearish or hopeless looking as it was for soybean prices during that tariff dispute with China. So again, I think the soybean sell-off was overdone, and I'm glad to see the market rebounding a bit from those lows. I think there's still going to be a good chance for some possible opportunities to make profitable sales in the new crop soybean price, and we'll get to that. The soybean exports have not been great. This has been a bearish factor for soybeans basically ever since Thanksgiving. Our shipments started slowing down. And again, this is a chart of actual shipments, not sales. As you can see, the black line is the 4-year average, and last year's green shaded area kept pretty much in pace with that 4-year average. But our red line, the current pace of soybean shipments, really took a wrong turn about Thanksgiving time, and we've been lagging on our soybean shipments ever since then. We have had some active sales up to November and December, but the shipment pace overall just wasn't good, and most recently it's down 19% from a year ago. So there is still some concern that that export estimate could be cut in soybeans, a tough situation. The other thing that is discouraging is that the current estimate, 1.72 billion bushels of soybean exports, is the second lowest in 10 years. So again, we come up against Brazil once again and this phenomenal pace of expansion that keeps happening year after year after year. It's a little bit like that frog in the pan of lukewarm water. You know, the temperature just goes up a degree every day. It doesn't feel so bad, but at some point it starts to feel like it's boiling, and it feels like we're getting close to that kind of a situation. Even though Brazil's had weather problems this year, it looks like they're probably going to harvest at least 5.4, maybe 5.5 billion bushels of beans. That's not a new record, but it's enough to compete with for us and especially when you consider we've got Argentina's crop coming also. The good side, the good news for soybean demand this year continues to come from the crush side of the market. Again, the blue line here is the processing value in Illinois, a weekly report that comes from USDA. If we take our bushel of soybeans to the crush plant, we get $14.20 worth of soybean meal, soybean oil, and soybean hulls. That continues to be enticing to keep that crush activity going. Processors are very happy. When I talked about this in Louisville, Kentucky earlier this year, we had a gentleman in the audience who was a part owner in the Castleton plant in North Dakota. He said, our crush plant's doing so well, we're probably going to have it paid off in 3 years. I mean, this continues to be a very strong factor of demand for beans. And of course, it's all about using soybean oil to make renewable diesel. That's keeping those margins profitable. Here is the chart from the Department of Energy. It's the monthly amount of soybean oil used to make biofuels each month. And for the year of 2023, the amount of soybean oil used was up 24% from the previous year. So it continues to be on a very strong pace, a record amounts of soybean oil being used. There are 4 new renewable diesel plants online for 2024, and we'll just have to see how that expansion goes as expected. Will it get overdone at some point? Yes, it probably will get overdone at some point. But I can tell you right now that my attention remains focused on the margins between the soy products and the cost of the soybean. And right now that continues to be a green light for demand. So that's continues to be a very good story for the soybean price. Okay, now let's take a look back, or let's look at the price of November soybeans, the history of the most recent bearish period from 2017 to 2020. It was a time when the ending stocks to use ratios ranged from 7% to 23%. And of course, the bigger 23% being a part of the trade tariff dispute with China. But I wanted to point out that even during that trade tariff dispute, we had a 21% rally during the season from the low of the range. So the old low was $8.15. Today that equates to about $10.68. If we put a 21% rally on that projected low, we're looking at roughly $12.92 a bushel. I think there's a good possibility, and again, you know, I can't guarantee anything. We can't say there'll be, I don't even know if there is going to be a rally this summer, right? But just given the history of the volatility of a bearish soybean market, it's quite reasonable if we could get to at least $12.92 in the current situation. And of course, if some weather concern comes up, it could be more than that. So I think we still have a good possibility of trying to make some forward sales at actually a profitable price on the soybeans, assuming the national average of $12.15 for producing the cost of soybeans in this current season. Here's the crop insurance math for soybeans, similar to what we did for corn. So the February average price of November beans was $11.55. If you have 85% revenue protection, that means you're getting a floor roughly of $9.80 a bushel, assuming an average yield in 2024. Obviously, that's a much tougher situation for both corn and beans than what we saw a year ago. Last year, for a lot of guys, I think the crop insurance covered their cost of production, and that's why we had almost 95 million acres of corn estimated at one time. Well, the current soybean price, November soybeans as of last night, $11.86. The 1060 put for the November contract is 18 cents, $11 put is 30 cents. Similar to corn, I don't think these are attractive prices to get enough above the 98 981 to do anything yet, but a little rally in soybeans would help go a long way to bring those put premiums down. And again, as with corn, the option volatility tends to pick up in May. Sometimes you can get those good opportunities in April when the volatility is still quiet. But in this case, we're already beat down in the market. We really need a rally to bring some of those put prices down. Should we do courage calls? I've heard some people talk about doing courage calls this year because prices have been beat down so hard. And you may think it may make sense because we're at the lower end of where we expect long-term support in these markets. But it's not something I'm going to recommend. I'll just say that out front. So right now, a November $13 call is going for 32 cents. That doesn't sound like much of a bargain to me. And the November 14 call is going to 17 cents. Typically, when you're in a bearish situation, it's not a good idea to double down on your bullish bets in the market. And that's kind of how I see the courage call situation right now. Now, if there was a $13 call going for a nickel or a dime, that may be more attractive. But at these prices, I just don't see that it's a great use of your money, and especially in a year maybe where cash is going to be tighter, definitely, than it has been the past 3 years. So again, to sum up, I have to say there's no guarantees that we're going to get any rally. I just have to be flat up straight about that. And I get it, and it's a very tough market situation we're in. But volatility is a normal part of the market, and I certainly expect to see something a little more helpful. And of course, how the weather plays out this year is going to have a lot to do with it. Fundamentally, there should be better price, should with the quotes around it, be better price opportunities ahead in 2024. And the idea would be that we want to get at least 50% forward sales made, as long as you're not in an area where drought is a significant concern. But I would plan now to say, what's a good price for my farm? If I got this price, I could survive this year okay, and I would consider putting those price levels in early, because if we do get a rally, these price opportunities often don't last long, especially in a bear market. I think it's important to have your worm in the water ahead of time, and that's when you get a chance to catch the fish. Those rallies could also give you a shot at inexpensive put options. And again, plan ahead right now. You know, if I could get this level of floor protection at this price, put that order in, you know, let it stand, and start there anyway. And we're just going to keep monitoring and looking at the market as it unfolds. But for right now, that's about the best I can tell you. Back to you, Katie.
Well, thank you, Todd. I think it's always interesting. I've mentioned this to you a few times. We don't always talk about puts, calls, the options markets in our marketing strategies here at DTN. Tell me a little bit about why that is this year. I know we'll get to Q&As later, but I can't wait on this one.
Yeah. Well, number one, obviously we're in a type of a market situation where that downside protection is needed. And we've already seen that proven out early this year. And the other thing is, if you noticed, I didn't talk about selling calls. I believe selling calls can also be a great part of the strategy, but what I like about buying inexpensive puts is that it's so simple. Everybody can understand it. There's no margin call required. You know what your risk level is and what your cost is, and it's never going to be worse than that. But it can give you a level not only of financial protection, but also emotional protection. You know, when you're in a downward market, it can be tough when you start thinking about, wow, what if this keeps going lower? But if you have that emotional protection of, well, at least because I have this put on, I know that I have at least this price guaranteed, that can help you sleep a lot at night. When you're short a call and the market's going against you and you got to come up with more margin money, it might theoretically make sense to do, but not everybody can handle the emotion strain of that.
And that's one thing I hear a lot when I talk with folks about crop insurance, and the benefits of it is that it really cuts off the worst case scenarios that can put people out of business. It's why you and I always talk about crop insurance. It's a fundamental part about the way you look at markets, because it really prevents some of those worst case take you out of business type of situations.
Yeah, and I think it's really important too. I think it helps you be more objective when it comes time to making that forward sale, because if you don't have that put on, then lots of times you'll panic out when the market looks the worst. But if it can give you the comfort and security to say, okay, I can hang in there and see if this market still has a chance for a better price, that often helps you in the long run.
And so the crop insurance deadline is tomorrow, Friday, March 15th. So if you haven't already made your purchases with your crop insurance agent, that is something you should probably get on today or tomorrow if you really like to wait for the last minute. So we're going to pause right here. Please put any questions you have for John Baranick or Todd Hultman in the Q&A, and we'll bring John back on in just a moment, and we'll talk a little bit more about your questions, the areas you have concerns or thoughts about. And if you don't put them in there, you just get to hear my questions. I've got good ones. I think it's worthwhile. But we'll be right back in just a moment. All right, welcome back to the DTN Ag Summit Series. I've got with me our lead analyst, Todd Hultman, and our ag meteorologist, John Baranick, for some question and answers. We have a couple of them in the queue already. We'll get to those. But please, if you have any while you're out there, please drop them in the chat, and we will make sure we get, or into the Q&A section, we'll make sure we get to those. So we'll kind of start up at the top. And I know Todd had mentioned 2019 and how the rally that year was really tied to the wet prevent plant conditions. John, does it look like we're going to have much prevent plant out there this year? What are the outlook for that?
I wouldn't say anything. I don't know enough about prevent plant to call that, but that's usually because it's super wet, and we don't have any areas out there right now that are. So we've had decent moisture, and it's gotten rid of a lot of the drought, but it's not built in that heavy soil moisture. Things can go wrong, and you could have a bomb cyclone like 2019 that really puts things off. Those kinds of events we can't really see too far into the future. But outside of something kind of dramatic, and we are expecting a more active spring season, but we're not in the same kind of space we were at back in 2019. So I don't see that being a huge issue this year, at least not from a weather standpoint.
So maybe not in a widespread fashion across major spots, just in the places where they just keep getting the rains.
Right.
Okay. And a question for you, Todd. China is known to buy more when prices are cheap. Any chance of surprise U.S. grain buys late spring or summer if prices stay low?
U.S. grain buy, well, I want to say China already has stepped in somewhat surprisingly and been a much more active buyer of Brazil soybeans just lately. I think I mentioned China's soybean price has come up recently. They've had a significant bounce up from that January low. And even though they're buying from Brazil, it helps us because the quicker they move out Brazil's harvest, the quicker that they get to our production late summer or early fall. So that's been good news there. On corn, unfortunately, they still have plenty of choices of where to go for corn. And Ukraine's corn happens to be pretty cheap right now. They've taken some of that. And we'll just have to see how the safrinha crop turns out. If the safrinha crop comes up short, then yes, we could see some surprise purchases from China. But don't forget, Argentina is going to be in there with a good crop this year, so that will be some competition too.
You mentioned Ukraine. I know for a long time we were focused on that Black Sea grain deal, but it looks like even without it, Ukrainian exports have been able to stand up and do all right. Where's all that looking?
Yeah, it's just phenomenal how Ukraine has been able basically to hold off Russia with one arm and keep the sea lanes open in the western side of the Black Sea for them to basically export and ship out at will. They've done a tremendous job and I think surprised everybody in how much grain they've been able to move since Russia pulled out of the Black Sea grain deal. So they continue to be an important source to the market. And I think for the bigger world at large, large. Thankfully, for us in the U.S., we already feel like we have enough competition the way it is. But they're doing much better than any of us expected.
So I'm going to pivot back to John because I realized I missed the second half of the question on prevent plant. It's really more of is there a fear of a cold snap this April once farmers are really deciding to get out and get started?
There is. And, I think I mentioned before that, it looks really great to get out there and do some field work and plant. But there are risks involved with an active spring season that we get some colder weather moving through. Our long-range forecasting team has singled out kind of a period there around mid-April as another chance for getting some Arctic air to move through. It's still on the early side of planting, right? So it might only push things back a little bit. But, if we can... if that does have some sort of effect, it could impact things a little bit. But those same forecasters we're looking at, once we get beyond that one period, it looks like it's all go toward warm weather as we head into May. So unlike the last couple of years where we've been coming off of La Niñas and we've had cold conditions lasting through April and across the northern section of the country through May, we don't really see that this year. And that's twofold. One is just the weather pattern. The second is the snow cover. We don't have any. So we don't have anything there to really hold temperatures back. Even in the Canadian prairies, that's really low right now. So, the switch from, anything cold there in mid-April to something warmer should be much quicker than what we see typically.
Now, I know fall is really far out. Do you have any predictions or thoughts about whether it'll be a fairly fast harvest? And I bet that probably depends on where you're located, too.
Probably. But honestly, if we have this hotter, drier-ish summer or just hotter summer, we don't have a whole lot of crazy soil moisture out there that would bog things down to begin with. During La Niñas, and we definitely saw that over the last few years, the fall weather isn't all that active either. I mean, we get systems moving through, right? And that's going to happen. But for the most part, conditions during the fall are relatively mild, warm, and dry, outside of, something with the polar vortex coming down a little early in November or something like that. So for the most part, I would say too far in advance a little bit, but still the history would suggest that harvest would go along pretty fine.
Okay. I do have a note here from Dana Mantini, one of our grain analysts here on the team, and he had something he wanted to add to Todd's commentary, so I'll just share that with you. He says, to further bolster the idea that there could be better prices in corn and soybeans is the fact that non-commercial speculative traders are holding near record net short in both markets. Any sort of bullish catalyst has the potential to accelerate that market recovery as those specs cover those short positions.
Yeah,
Thoughts, Todd?
That's absolutely a great point. Dana's right. We've got near record short positions from the spec side of the market in corn, and we have record positions on the short side of the market in beans. And that's in those prior bearish years. I would suggest they also have that same situation. So when you do get a weather surprise or any type of weather surprise that rallies the market, it just adds to that rally. And even though it might not last long, it certainly helps get us off those lows. And that's where those sometimes very quick opportunities come. And that's why I say have your price orders in there.
So one thing you sort of touched on here and there, Todd, was a little bit about USDA's outlook estimates, which was their first real look at the 2024 growing season. I know we are in March. In a couple of weeks, we have the prospective plantings report. Where do you think acreage is likely to land? What are farmers thinking as far as corn versus soybeans and that perennial battle?
It's a good question. I have a lot of curiosity there. Of course, we already know that our wheat production estimate is lower, so there's some room for increase there. On the other hand, as I mentioned, last year's crop insurance levels almost guaranteed that you could have at least a break-even outcome by planting corn, and so we saw a big boost in the corn acres. We don't have that situation this year. There's definitely risk to everything you're planting this year, but investment in the farm being what it is, you got to plant something right. So my best guess is corn acres probably around 91 million, maybe 92, and soybeans 85 to 86. I think USDA said 87 and a half. I'll be glad to see soybeans get that big, but I think it's going to have to be proved out first.
Well, we did have a pretty good fall season last year. I heard a lot of farmers got their anhydrous on early if that was part of their plan. So some of those acres are already locked in. I have, just flying into Omaha this week, I saw plenty of fields that had already been tilled and worked and ready to go. I think there's a lot of people that are, the weather and the markets may not be the story, but farmers like to plant a crop. They're ready to get going.
Yeah, and here we are. Tomorrow's the Ides of March. We're not that far away.
Oh, the Ides of March.
Even all the way up in Minnesota, too. I mean, there's plenty of field work going on all the way up north as well, which you usually don't see that happening in March because it's covered in snow. So
you guys got very little snow this year.
Very little, yeah. I mean, where I live outside the Twin Cities, outside of when we were at the National Farm Machinery Show in mid-February, we got a 6-inch event. Outside of that, I mean, we've had 14 inches in the Twin Cities here, which is almost record low. And so it never stuck around. It was so warm. Anything that did fall melted real quick. And and that's another thing that I didn't really mention too. I mean, soils never froze this winter, and so all the snow and all the rain that has fallen has already gone into the soil column. So we don't, I mentioned we don't have any snowpack to kind of add to it, and we're going to be kind of, depending on this active spring season to kind of give us some better soil moisture for some of those drier areas.
No, I was talking with Todd earlier too, and it sounds like you guys had a Nashville winter, but Nashville got more of a more for us. We had a record-setting 8 inches snowfall. All we got for the winter, but that's a lot for where I live. But you got just a couple inches more.
Yeah, really kind of snuck by without a lot of snow. I'm up just north of Brookings in South Dakota. We did have some rain events, but overall, it's been quite warm, except for those 2 weeks in January where it was painfully cold. But other than that, they could definitely use some more moisture.
So we've got a question from Lynn here. Says, I know you're concentrating mostly on corn and soybeans. You mentioned a possible cold snap in April. What do you think it might be significant enough to affect the wheat market? And do you have a time to kind of touch on that?
Yeah, and the biggest concern too has been it's been so warm over the winter that wheat is kicking off really early and developing quickly. So, I mean, yes, there is some concern. By the time we get into April, though, it gets harder and harder for the really cold temperatures to settle down into the plains. Not impossible, but, with the momentum we've had of being warmer and no snow cover, any of that Arctic air that does come down from Canada has a pretty good chance of moderating by the time it gets into wheat country, especially down in the soft red winter wheat areas. It's really tough to get frost down there in April. With this kind of setup. So not impossible. I wouldn't say that we're especially at risk because of how quickly the wheat's been growing, but it'll be tough to see if we get anything of significance that would really damage the wheat crop.
I visited with a farmer from Southwest Kansas this winter, and he was just pounding the table. I just want a wheat crop. I just want a wheat crop after the past 3 years. Yeah. And I said, I'm sorry, I think La Nina's coming back. Don't hurt me.
Yeah.
But maybe with the timing of it, he'll have a chance.
Well, it was interesting too because that first La Nina that happened didn't really affect that first wheat crop. It affected the next two and or the next three. And as we went into El Nino last year, it was significantly impacted by it too. So, unfortunately, that's not good news to anybody who's a wheat farmer out there in the southwestern plains. But there's always hope, right? And every year is going to be different. Just because it looks a certain way doesn't mean it's going to necessarily hit your farm. You always hear about some areas where they got really good rains in July last year, right? But not everybody did. So someone who was in northeast Iowa was like, "Where's my rain? I didn't get it." Everybody's talking about how great the rain is, but I didn't get it. So there's going to be sorts of things that happen like that every year, and we'll just hope and pray that it's fewer people than it is.
And the wheat market's not really in a great spot either, is it, Todd?
No, and that whole story, all roads lead back to Russia on that, because Russia set out in 2012 to double their wheat production. They've done that. It's way beyond what they need to consume. They're dominating the export market by a wide margin, and they're dominating with very cheap prices. And it surprised me a little bit that they've been able to maintain these cheap prices this late into the season. Typically, we see some demand help that wheat price through the winter times when the end users have to bid up for the wheat, but that's not been the case this year. Russia's been there to service just about every sale imaginable, and they've really sucked out the oxygen from the room when it comes to U.S. and Europe having export opportunities. So we're looking at our lowest wheat exports in over 50 years. It's a very, very tough situation, and it all gets down to the political strategy of Mr. Putin spreading his influence in the world that needs wheat.
And when, wheat exports are low, they tend to hope for some additional feeding demand, which there's so much corn that kind of offsets that, makes it a little more challenging there too.
It strains everybody. We've gone from a 3-crop nation, we're getting down to a 2-crop nation, and that just makes it tougher on everybody.
Okay. The one market we did not really touch on much today was cattle. You want to give a quick little overview, because as we discussed at our meetings this week, that corn farmers, soybean farmers still do care about the cattle markets.
Yeah, well, as I told a fellow at Sioux Falls, cattle's very easy. There aren't any. So just no matter where you look, the numbers are down. And I know the on-feed number is there. But before you get to expansion, you have to pull heifers out of the market to make those cattle. And we just haven't seen that yet. So the pressure is all on the packers this time around. And it's been a long time coming, but that's where this market is. And of course, there's going to be choppy scares. In the fourth quarter of last year, we saw a bit of a scare to the cattle market, but it largely had to do with speculative positions and people selling more puts than they could afford to hold. So once you get rid of those volatile influences, we still have a cash market that's steadily working higher. And the question is, are we going to have pasture? Are we going to have beneficial conditions enough to help expand that cattle herd? It may not happen this year. It may not be for a while. So it's going to continue to be a tough market. We're going to have higher beef prices at the grocery store. I have no doubt about that. And it's much tougher to be a packer these days than it is to be a producer, and that's something we don't often see.
All right, thanks, Todd. Before we wrap, I want to give you guys each a chance for any final thoughts or things producers should be keeping in mind in the season. John, go ahead.
Oh, yes. Thanks for going to me first, because we'll let Todd wrap up with the worst news, right? So, I mean, we're in a better spot thanks to El Nino. We're not in a great spot. We kind of hope to be. And this flip to La Nina does bring about a lot of uncertainty and a lot of risk for weather, especially for those out in the Western Corn Belt. We'll continue to be monitoring that, and we'll keep you up to date on dtnpf.com as much as we can. And just kind of hope that I'm wrong, right? Meteorologists are always wrong. So it'd be great if we get a summer that turns out to be not so hot and a little bit rainier. So we'll just keep hoping and praying, I guess. The other thing would be was to keep your eye on South America as they continue to build their acres down there and continue to be the main player. That's going to be important. And this safrinha crop is, I mean, it looks good now, but it's not going to look good for long. So I think there's ample opportunity. Todd was talking about how, we can see some jumps there. And, a lot of the reports coming out have been for lower and lower corn crops this year. And USDA hasn't followed suit so much, but I think there's a good bit of room there to come down on those production numbers. So, if that does happen, and it looks like it probably will, I think we at least have some hope for what Todd's got to sell you. So I'll just say that, hope, I guess. I know farmers kind of live on hope sometimes, but looks like this is another year of it.
Sure. Well, I would just say that, we're back to the old story. We've been losing market share in the world exports for a few decades now. That's not a new story, but it's getting to a more painful point. And I don't care who the next president is, we're not going to be able to stop Brazil from continuing to increase its cropland base. I looked at the Ag Census report the other day. U.S. has lost 63 million cropland acres in the past 25 years. Brazil has added probably 50 plus million acres the last 15 years just for their soybeans. That's a very difficult trend to compete with. It's not getting any better. And that's why biofuels are so important in helping profitability in the ag sector. We need that domestic demand, not just for energy reasons, but also for ag reasons. Both arguments make very good sense. And so we'll be watching that SAF announcement ahead. In the meantime, you got to know your costs, you got to know your numbers. And right this year, I think it's a battle of inches. Your first goal in mind is try to do what you can on an affordable basis to get your floor up from that crop insurance level. Look for opportunities to get a better floor under the situation so you can at least cut or stop the bleeding if possible. And then if we do happen to be fortunate enough to get a good rally to make a forward sale price, be ready for that. And that's the best I can tell you for the moment. I wish I had guarantees, but we don't.
And I think that's really the phrase, be hopeful and be ready, have a plan and be willing to execute. I know people get caught up in a rally mindset and trying to wait to time it to the peak. But as you and most of the analysts I talk to say, feed that rally, know your numbers, get your orders in because it might come, it might go quick. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys both for joining me. Thank you for joining us at home. We hope you found this information helpful and useful. If there's anything that you missed throughout the day, we will have a replay available. You should get an email when that's ready. Otherwise, it will be up on the DTN.com website, and we will share a link for all of that and some of our commentary and things in the future. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining me. Have a great day and hopefully a safe and prosperous springtime.